It's an honor to be here. Our center is actually 20 years old. This is part 2 of a center that was started at UCLA, the Center for Communication Policy, co-founded by me and Jeff Cowan. That name somehow seems to keep coming up. And in 2004, with Jeff being dean, Larry Gross being chair, how could one not want to be here? And I mean that very sincerely. And this is actually our 10th anniversary of coming over from UCLA, and the best move we ever made. And even though we changed our name, our entire staff moved over, all of our research moved over, we took our furniture. There was nothing left at UCLA, and they wisely either had to invest in it or let it close, and they let it close. So we have been thrilled to be here for the last 10 years. We, and I think this probably was true of some of the other centers that talked this morning, we're committed to doing work that changes the world, that touches people's lives. And we do all kinds of things, but let me focus on our signature project, because everything we do flows out of our signature project, the World Internet Project. And a little bit of background, I'm an old television guy. I've spent most of my life in and around the world of television, the most powerful medium ever invented. I've worked in television and producing it, worked with all 4 networks, and studying it. And I was always taught that we blew it where television was concerned. We lost a great opportunity. And what I mean by that is television, if you think about it, is the only mass medium that we knew ahead of time was going to be a mass medium. There was no question in the 40s and 50s that radio listeners were going to embrace radio with pictures. So since we knew television was going to be a phenomenon before the first signal was ever broadcast, what I was taught that we should have done but didn't do is we should have tracked people before they had television and then gone back to them year after year as they acquired and used it to see how it changed their lives. And if we had done that, we could have learned some pretty important things, starting with simple questions. Where did the time for television come from? When people were watching 3 hours of television a day, and we asked them, where'd those 3 hours come from? What are you doing less of? They didn't know. They just sort of grabbed that time out of the air. We could have learned if the time for television came from talking on the phone, from talking as a family, from schoolwork, from going to the movies, reading newspapers or magazines, and 1,000 other things. And in the 90s, was actually when I was working with the 4 networks under an antitrust waiver, in the 90s, I became convinced, like many of you, that digital communication, first the web, and now mobile, was going to be far more powerful than television. So believing that we lost a great opportunity with television and that digital was going to be even more important than television, 14 years ago, we launched this massive project, this tracking of digital that we thought should have been conducted of television in the 40s and 50s. And very briefly, we started in the United States. We took a representative sample of the American population. We've gone back to the same people in a panel study 14 years in a row, and we've watched as non-users move to dial-up, as dial-up users migrate to broadband. We saw immediately, as you all know, broadband changed everything, but it wasn't the speed of broadband that changed everything. The speed was important. What was critical was the always-on, the direct connection to the web, integrating it into your life. We watch globally as 2% drop off the web, and we want to know who are these people who leave and why, and more importantly, do they return, and if so, when and what brings them back? And then 14 years in, we continue to talk to the never users, 11% of Americans, most of them over the age of 65, but keep in mind, most people over the age of 65 are online. And among the never users, we want to know who are they, why are they not online, how do they do things offline the rest of us do online, and increasingly they pay more to do those things offline. And then a question we're working with about 12 governments around the world, particularly the Australian government, should we care about the never users? Should we be twisting their arms, cajoling them, subsidizing them to go online? Or should we let them live their lives peaceably and happily, disconnected from the web? Well, I'll tell you one thing about the never users. I do a fair number of predictions of things that will happen in the next 2 to 4 years, and I'll talk about a couple of those. But I only make one 20-year prediction. And my one 20-year prediction is that internet penetration, which is at 89% today, will go to television levels of 98, 99%. And the way I think we know that, looking at our data, is that if you look at people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, as they move into their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and if they're healthy, even beyond, we know they will take the internet with them. There will never come a day that we in this room look at the internet and say, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here, thank you very much, see you later. We will actually find it more useful as we get older. And to look at one stereotype, maybe less mobile, or our eyesight might diminish, or to use another stereotype, as we're planning our skiing vacations in our 90s, we'll use the internet to plan them. But the point is, today's users will never give up the internet. It's not a function of being older and not being online. It's only a function of 11% of today's older people are not online and will never go online. But that will change, not incrementally, that will change as those 11% gracefully move on to their reward, or as demographers say, die off. So we will be at 9. Anyway, so we have data, we have insight nobody else collected. 14 years, we started in the United States. We're now doing this work in 45 countries around the world. We just added 13 African countries, and we're going to release our first African report within a month. We added in our partnership with Northwestern University in Doha, Qatar, as our center, we added 7 Middle Eastern countries, including Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, Jordan, UAE, Qatar, and I'm missing one other place, Morocco, and we'll do a Middle Eastern report later in the year. We do an American report once a year. All of these are on our website, which you can get through the main Annenberg page. And we do a global report once a year. Although a global report doesn't have 45 countries every year, because some of our partners, mostly for funding reasons, go into the field every other year. So our global report usually has about 20, 22 countries at a time. We also have an annual meeting of all of our research partners. Anyone from Annenberg is welcome to join us. 2012, it was in Dubai. Last year, it was in Bogota. And this year, and this is not a hard sell, attendance is going to be high. We're at Lake Como in Italy. And next year, we'll be in Johannesburg in South Africa. So we have this incredible network, and what I do as director of the center, I spend a big chunk of my time with governments. We do lots of briefing. We want what we think is good research in the hands of all kinds of audiences so that they can create better policy. I spend a large amount of time with governments. We do a White House briefing usually once a year, congressional, FCC, CIA. We do about 20 different governments around the world, number 10 Downing Street. We've worked with the presidents of Colombia, Chile, the Emir of Qatar, the Prime Minister of Australia, and a bunch of others. We work closely with the Australian government on their national broadband network and have been advising them from the beginning. We work with about 7 or 8 global companies on digital strategy. We don't do any research for companies. We do our own research, and we share that research with companies who want to know what it is we're finding and want to know how they can try to use some of that research. We work with Ericsson, who's built most of the world's mobile infrastructure and created mobile broadband and Bluetooth. We work very closely with WPP and Martin Sorrell, and especially Group M, the media buying part, and through them with probably 70 different brands every year. We work with AARP, who feels they get ignored in this digital world. And we work with the biggest company in Australia. I love Australia. I need a good excuse to go there. Unfortunately, I have one. And we work with a number of other companies. And we do briefings for all kinds of NGOs, the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and all that's on the website. But let me just share with you in just a handful of minutes, and I mean literally a handful of minutes, some of the richness of our data. First thing, one of the things I'm most interested in, and this is what attracted AARP's attention, who said, hey, what about us? But I spend a lot of time looking at teenagers. I love teenagers. I'm deeply impressed with teenagers. I spend a lot of time, but what I want to know looking at teenagers is what things do they do that they do because they're young and they have time? In other words, which behaviors do they abandon when they get older and pesky things like jobs, spouses, and children get in the way? And which behaviors do teenagers engage in that are truly transformational, and they'll take with them the rest of their lives, and all those who follow will take with them? And we're able now to see some of those things. Silly things like not wearing watches, we think is lifelong. On the other hand, on a more serious level, we're finding the teenage, and it's taken us 14 years to get here, and we're not quite ready to publish this yet, but we found the teenage attitude towards privacy. The old Scott McNeely quote, there is no privacy, get over it, I have nothing to hide. That seems to be a teenage attitude. As they get into their late 20s, they begin to revert to their parents' attitudes towards privacy. The two types of privacy people care the most about are financial and medical. And when you're 17 years old, your financial history is not very interesting unless you're Justin Bieber, and your medical history, unless you have, God forbid, a disease, is not very interesting. But as they get older, all of a sudden they have things they care about. So we're really interested in behaviors and which are transitional and which are transformational. We're getting a lot of attention the last couple months for some of the stuff we've said about teenagers and social media. And just very briefly, back in 2005, Rupert Murdoch buys MySpace for $580 million. And he says that he bought it because it allowed him to reach the teenagers he could no longer reach through his newspapers, and it were even getting harder to reach through his television networks. Same time Murdoch buys MySpace, 2005, we release our 5th report. I'm talking to reporters, telling them about all the things we're finding in year 5, and one of the reporters asks, sort of an afterthought question, what do you think about Murdoch buying MySpace? And I said, I thought it was a great investment. That part of the quote has been lost forever. But he would never be able to hang on to the teenage users of MySpace. And they got angry when I said that, and they fought back not by saying you're wrong, but by saying, look how much money we're making. Absolutely right. Even though they paid $580 million and sold it 2.5 years ago to a group of investors, including Justin Timberlake, for $35 million, it was not a bad investment. Almost the day they bought it, they signed a $900 million ad share deal with Google. They brilliantly marketed their Fox films and television shows on MySpace, and they sold a lot of advertising. They made a lot of money. But we were right. They weren't able to hang on to the teenage users of MySpace. It's not that we were so brilliant. We had seen the rise and fall of GeoCities, the rise and fall of a little-known network that Larry will know well, Friendster. And what I said in 2005, and got a lot of attention when I said this, but I wasn't looking for attention. I said that to a teenager, an online community is like a nightclub. And when the nightclub becomes too popular or the uncool kids start showing up at the nightclub, you're out of there. And as a teenager, what's the worst thing that could happen to you in a nightclub? Not literally the worst. That would be somebody with a bomb or a gun coming in. But to most teenagers, the worst thing that could happen to you in a nightclub is your mother walks in. And now your mother wants to friend you on Facebook. How long are you going to hang around in a place with your cool friends where your mother's hanging around? I actually believe, and I say this in the most serious places, so I'm not being, I believe almost all of life's issues can be answered through Seinfeld. And if you are a Seinfeld fan, if you're not, just give me 20 seconds. There's a wonderful, they're all wonderful, wonderful old Seinfeld where George's mother has separated from his father, Frank. And she's explaining to George that now, she says, I'm a separate. And as a separate, I'm out there. And George, who's single, says, well, I'm out there also. And if I ever ran into you out there, there's not enough therapy on planet Earth to fix me. So 5 years ago, some of the same reporters are there and say, okay, you got it right on MySpace. What's going to happen to Facebook? And we've been on record in print for 5 years. I said the same thing happens to Facebook, with two exceptions. One, it will grow for at least another 5 or 6 years. It was about 800 million then. It'll grow to over a billion. It's at about 1.15 right now, especially in the developing world. If you go to places like Brazil, 3 years ago, their social networking site, Orkut, was practically a way of life or a religion. It's now almost gone. We said it'll grow for at least another 5 years. And second, it'll never go away. It's not dying. It will survive forever as the place you go to communicate with your mother and father, brothers and sisters. It will become the phone directory to the planet, where you find people. 2 years ago, there was research, not ours, that showed in the US, UK, Canada, Facebook use was down among teenagers. Very interesting work a little over a year ago that showed among American teenagers, Tumblr was more popular than Facebook. I think if you did the same research today, it would show that Snapchat is more popular than Facebook. As you may know, Mark Zuckerberg spent $1 billion for Instagram. He offered the founder, the 21-year-old founder of Snapchat, $3 billion. He turned it down. And my only comment is Zuckerberg's going to have his checkbook out every year writing these checks. And he probably gets that. Anyway, and then just lastly, and there's no personal vindication here, but in October, I was at a major event, something called Group M, What's Next, that looks at the future of all this media, and talked about this. And I was followed by one of my dear friends, who's the head of all advertising for Facebook, and she was asked about this, and she said, very nice, said, we love Jeff, and we love his research, but no, it's not happening. 10 days later, their CFO put out an official statement that it's happening, and it's happening much faster. We look a lot at the future of all media, newspapers, television. If anyone's interested in the future of television, I have a presentation on our website that I think is pretty provocative and pretty compelling. We are looking a lot at how e-commerce is the next line of businesses that will be put out. I happen to think when we look at our Amazon data, I think if you want to see the real successor to Steve Jobs, who's the smartest guy in the room, the guy who can see around corners and whose personality is every bit as unpleasant as Steve Jobs, it's Jeff Bezos. I think Amazon is taking over the world. Everything you know in e-commerce, where now we're buying toothpaste, deodorant, floss, batteries, half the diapers in America are sold online. Everything that we're seeing in e-commerce is only a third of Amazon's plan to take over the world. The second third is devices and programs. In December, they introduced their first original programs. similar to what Netflix did, and consider how nervous Netflix is, because Amazon Prime, you can't call it free, the television part. It's not literally free, but everybody buys it for the shipping, and the television is sort of free, making Netflix very nervous. And then the third of Amazon taking over the world that makes people even more nervous is Amazon Web Services, which does the back end for Netflix, does the back end for the US government, does the back end for governments and businesses all over the world. I have the best job in the world. I am the luckiest guy in the world. I get to go around the world sharing this, not just with governments and companies. We also do the Catholic Church National Council of Bishops, and we do all kinds of religious meetings, parental groups, and we are proud to be affiliated with the Annenberg School. We love the work we do, and we share it with everybody, and anyone who's interested in it is welcome to download our reports, and I am happy to take questions, if there are any questions. Professor Aronson.
As long as you're in the predictive mode.
Sure. And I'm willing to share my wrong predictions, too.
Time Warner Comcast.
If this presentation, this pretty provocative one I said that we just put on the site, is 14 developments in television over the last 12 months that show the television's at the tipping point. And number one is the Time Warner CBS fiasco of the summer. And I start by saying, I always thought Time Warner in that fight by taking off CBS sort of deserved the Senator Ted Cruz Award for wasted effort. And he actually put his wasted effort out again this week. It made no sense. Time Warner had no leverage. And at the end of the war, they had even less leverage, caved in completely, lost 305,000 subscribers, and basically lost any opportunity to be a self-operating company and became a target for takeover. I think this is a combination of Time Warner Cable, which is no longer part of Time Warner, hasn't been for a couple of years, the number 2 cable operator in the country being consumed by Comcast, the number 1. There'll be a lot of complaining by advocates, but the deal will go through. They don't compete in almost any market. They will take 3 million subscribers out of the 11 million of Time Warner and sell them to make it tolerable to regulators. And they will become a dominant force, more dominant than they are. And they will get away with it because, no, not get away with it implies something. They will get approved because cable is becoming so weak now based on all the competition from all online. My view is even without this, the cable companies were in serious trouble. You talk to their CEOs and they will tell you their future is not in television services, it's in broadband. We think the whole television world changes. I believe it happens with HBO when they, quote, go over the top. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, that means they will sell HBO directly to the consumer through the internet, not requiring a cable system. And that whole system was about to break down. So I think all of that will lead to Comcast being able to take over Time Warner. And the Time Warner households are the most influential in the country because they are New York, they're all of Hollywood, they're all of Manhattan, and they're well worth having. But Comcast has become a colossus. Comcast was able to take over a television network because networks were weak. They're now the colossus, 30% of the country in cable. They're Universal Studios, but I think the deal will go through. Whether it'll be good for consumers or not, I don't think it's going to make much difference either way. We'll see if I'm right. Any other questions?
Quick one about Netflix.
Yes.
What do you think they have a sustainable? Well, today's the day, I guess. They're going to restart how to start. But
Netflix.
do they have a sustainable business model?
They sure do. Keep in mind, 2 years ago, they were at the brink. They self-inflicted. They almost died, lost 90% of their stock value as they tried to get out of the red envelope business, which they renamed Quickster, and then and the consumers rebelled. They lost over 1 million, but they came back. And then what really brought them back, if you look at all, and this is what Amazon knows with Prime, HBO was a moderately successful movie service that ran movies quicker than were on network television, that were uncut and uninterrupted. But what turned HBO into a compelling cultural icon was the original programs. Most famously, Sex and the City, Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, now True Blood, Girls, Game of Thrones. Same thing, Netflix was showing movies much later than you could rent them. And what really transformed Netflix, and it's only been about 1.5 years now, was their first original series was Lilyhammer, which wasn't all that successful, House of Cards, which broke crazy, and Orange is the New Black, this Romney documentary. Now they have surpassed HBO in number of subscribers with Netflix. They have changed the way we watch television, the brilliance of releasing, and they said they weren't going to do it, but they did do it again. They said they weren't going to release House of Cards 2 all at once, but they did. I've always been a binge viewer, but to be a binge viewer of Mad Men, I had to record every episode, make sure it stayed pristine, not listen to news reports, and then watch it 13 weeks later. They let you watch it day one. Also, something Netflix is doing, and HBO Go, if you have HBO and use Go, they're doing this. They are well aware at Netflix that the average household shares its passwords with as many as 4 other families or people. And that doesn't bother them right now. They are like heroin dealers passing out free samples. And they know when the time comes to crack down, they will, and they estimate 80% of the audience will keep Netflix. But their big concern right now is Amazon, which appears to be free. But they've surpassed HBO, and they are to the best we can see, here to stay.
Thank you very much.
All right, my pleasure.
Okay.